The church was so quiet you could hear the flowers wilting in their arrangements. I sat in the front pew, my black dress hanging on me like a grief I couldn't quite fill, and I kept waiting. Waiting for the sound of car doors. Waiting for my children to slip into the seats beside me. Waiting for someone, anyone, to sit with their mother while she buried her husband of 48 years. But the wait never ended, and as I stared at Thomas's casket, I realized something that should have broken me completely, but somehow didn't. I was more alone in that crowded church than I had ever been in my life. Hello, everyone. Before I share what really happened that day, I want to tell you something true. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for, through pain we never deserved. What I'm about to tell you is filled with truth, with betrayal, with love, and with redemption. It's about what happens when you give everything to a family and discover that giving isn't always enough. It's about the secrets we keep to protect people, and the cost of that protection. Each story like mine touches the soul and reveals what really happens behind closed doors. So before I begin, I want to know, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if what you hear moves your heart, if you recognize yourself in this story, please consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. It helps more people become aware of the reality of how the elderly are sometimes forgotten, and how we all must do better. Now, let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Ellen Hayes. Though everyone's called me Maggie for 72 years, I've lived a good life, not perfect, but good. I raised 3 children, volunteered at the library for 30 years, baked for church fundraisers, and stood beside my husband through everything this world threw at us. Thomas and I married in 1976. He was a high school principal, kind-hearted and steady. I was a teacher's aide with dreams of my own. But when our first child was born, we made the choice together that I'd stay home. It made sense at the time. It always makes sense at the time. The morning of Thomas's funeral, I woke up and couldn't remember why I was so sad. For just a moment, maybe half a second, my mind was blank and peaceful. Then it all came crashing back. My husband was gone. The cancer had been fast, 3 months from diagnosis to goodbye. We'd had time to say the things that mattered, or at least I thought we had. Thomas held my hand in that hospital bed and told me he loved me. He said I'd been his greatest blessing. He asked me not to be alone after he was gone. I promised I wouldn't be. I was thinking of my children when I made that promise. By 10:47 a.m. on that Tuesday morning, I was sitting in the front pew of First Methodist Church. Wearing the black dress my daughter Sarah had helped me pick out 2 years ago for her mother-in-law's funeral. The funeral director had asked if I wanted to sit in the family room backstage, away from the view of mourners. I'd said no. I wanted to be seen. I wanted my children to see me, brave and dignified, saying goodbye to their father. The organist played soft hymns. The flowers smelled like perfume and decay. The casket was mahogany, the one Thomas and I had chosen together when we were still pretending he might beat the odds. I kept my hands folded in my lap and my chin up, the way my mother taught me. Ladies don't fall apart in public. At 10:52 I checked my phone, nothing. At 10:58, I turned around and looked at the church doors one more time. At 11:00, Pastor David Williams began the service. My son David wasn't there. My daughter Sarah wasn't there. My youngest, Jennifer, wasn't there either. But I'll tell you who was there: Carol Martinez, my best friend of 43 years, who left her job early to sit beside me. Tom's brother, Uncle Richard, and his wife. A handful of Thomas's former colleagues from the school. Some neighbors. A few of my volunteer friends from the library. Maybe 40 people total in a church that could hold 300. I won't lie to you. I felt it like a physical blow. It was the kind of pain that's worse than the grief itself, because it comes with shame. What had I done wrong? What message had I sent to my children that their father's death wasn't worth stopping their lives for? David, my oldest, had texted me that morning, "Mom, I'm so sorry. A major client situation came up. I can't get out of the office. I love Dad, but I'm sure you understand. I'll make the funeral reception." He didn't make the reception either. His secretary sent flowers. Sarah had called the night before. She was in tears, she said. But her in-laws were visiting from out of state, and she'd already committed to hosting a dinner party. I could never reschedule, she'd explained, as if I'd asked her to move mountains. "Everyone's depending on me, Mom. You know how it is, I'll be there in spirit." Jennifer hadn't called at all. I found out later, through a text from her college roommate, who still lived in town, that she'd gone to her boyfriend's birthday party weekend in the mountains. She'd gotten back the day after the funeral and called to apologize, but her apology was brief. She had to get back to her new job in marketing. She was sorry, but these things happened, these things. As if burying your father was a thing that just happened, something you scheduled around like a dentist appointment. Pastor Williams gave a beautiful eulogy. He talked about Thomas's dedication to education, his quiet kindness, his love of gardening. He mentioned his wonderful family, without knowing that half of that family couldn't be bothered to show up. Carol squeezed my hand during that part, and I felt her trembling, whether with anger or sympathy, I couldn't tell. When it came time for family to say a few words, I stood up. My legs shook. I walked to the pulpit, and I looked out at those 40 faces looking back at me. I didn't tell them what I was really thinking. I told them about the man my husband was. I told them about the way he'd rubbed my feet every night after I'd stood all day in the classroom. About how he'd learned to make my mother's recipes so I wouldn't have to cook alone. About the Saturday morning breakfast tradition we'd kept for 47 years, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, not always talking, but always together. I didn't tell them that my children had abandoned me. After the service, people came up to hug me and tell me they were sorry for my loss. I accepted their sympathy like a doll accepts a hug, stiffly, automatically, with no real feeling behind it. I was numb. That numbness was a gift, actually. It got me through the graveside service. It got me home. It wore off at around 2 p.m. That's when I sat down in Thomas's study, the room he loved most, surrounded by his books and his memories, and I started to really understand what had happened. My children, the ones I'd given everything to, the ones I'd sacrificed my own career and dreams for, had chosen other things, a job, a dinner party, a birthday weekend. Other things mattered more than saying goodbye to their father. I sat in his leather chair and I cried. Not the quiet tears of grief, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose heart is breaking in a way she never expected. Because it's one thing to lose your husband. It's another thing to realize that you've lost your children too, even though they're still alive. And that's when I found the journal. It was on the shelf above his desk, tucked between a gardening book and a mystery novel. A leather-bound journal with his initials on the cover, T.E.H. Thomas Edward Hayes. My hands were shaking as I pulled it down. I wasn't sure if I should read it. Some things, I believed, were meant to be private, but grief makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. And I needed to feel close to him. I opened to a random page and read words that would change everything. The first entry was dated January 15, 2010. 14 years ago, Maggie made my favorite pot roast today. She spent 3 hours preparing it, even though her knees have been giving her trouble. When I asked her why she went to such effort, she just smiled and said, "Because I love you." That's all she ever says. Because I love you. After all these years, it still makes my heart stop. I had to stop reading. I couldn't breathe. Thomas had kept a journal. All this time, 48 years of marriage, and I'd never known. There were hundreds of pages, filled with his careful handwriting, his thoughts, his private observations of our life together. I felt like I was trespassing in the most sacred part of him. But I couldn't stop reading. I flipped forward. Entry after entry chronicled the small moments of our life. The day Sarah was born and he cried in the hospital waiting room. The year David had trouble in school and Thomas spent every evening helping him with his homework. The morning I'd forgotten our anniversary and felt so terrible that I cried. And Thomas had held me and told me that loving me wasn't something he could forget. It was something he lived every single day. There were entries about his worries too. Concerns about money when David wanted to go to an expensive college. Anxiety about the recession in 2008. Frustration about his cholesterol levels. Fear about getting older. But underneath every concern was this consistent, unwavering theme: gratitude for me. Gratitude for our life. I found an entry from 2015, after David got his big promotion at the accounting firm. David called today to tell us about the promotion. I was so proud I could barely speak. He didn't have much time to talk, very busy with the transition. But I heard it in his voice. He's doing well. He's happy with his life, his wife, his children. That's all I ever wanted for them. But I noticed something that made me sad. When I asked about his weekend plans, he mentioned a golf outing with clients. I asked when he might visit, and there was this pause. "Soon, Dad," he said. Soon. That word has a lot of weight to it. I turned the pages faster now, desperate and terrified of what I would find. Because somewhere in these journals, I knew Thomas had chronicled the slow drift of his relationship with our children. the distance that had grown like a fog between them, thick and suffocating, and I had been so caught up in the daily work of life that I hadn't noticed it happening. There was an entry from 2019. After Sarah's promotion to regional director, Sarah and her family came to dinner. The children were on their phones the whole time. Sarah seemed stressed, distracted. I tried to talk to her about a book I'd read, but she kept checking her watch. After dinner, they left early. "We have an early morning," Sarah said. "There's always an early morning." I asked myself tonight, at what point do your children become strangers? At what point did I stop knowing what they're thinking, feeling, dreaming about? I looked at Maggie across the dinner table, and I realized she's the only person who really knows me anymore. I should tell her that more often. I should tell her she's enough for me. I should tell her a lot of things. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the journal. I turned to the most recent entries, the ones written after his diagnosis. The handwriting became shakier as the illness progressed. Some days the letters were spindly and uncertain. Other days they were bold and determined, as if he was fighting the cancer through the force of his pen. There was an entry from just 2 weeks before he died. "Today I finally understood something I should have understood years ago. Maggie has been my entire world, and I've been hers, and that's not a sad thing, it's the most beautiful thing. Yes, I wish our children visited more often. Yes, I wish they picked up the phone and called just to hear my voice. Yes, I wish they understood how much I love them, how their success is my greatest joy, even if they've grown too busy to celebrate it with their mother and me. But I made peace with it today. Some people are built for small, intimate circles. And I am that way. I always have been. My love doesn't need an audience. It needs only her, my Maggie, and she is more than enough. She has always been more than enough." The last entry was dated 3 days before he went to the hospital for the final time. I asked Maggie today if she would be okay when I'm gone. She tried to be brave, told me she would be fine, but I saw the fear in her eyes and it broke my heart. I wanted to tell her that she doesn't need to be fine, that it's okay to fall apart. That she spent her whole life being strong for everyone else, and now it's time for her to do something for herself. I wrote her a letter today and hid it in my desk drawer. I don't know if she'll find it, but if she does, I hope she'll understand what I'm trying to say live, my love. Don't just survive, live. Do the things we always talked about, go to that pottery class, travel to the coast, sit in the sun without feeling guilty about it. Fall in love with your life the way I've always loved you. That's all I want for her. I closed the journal and held it to my chest. I don't know how long I sat there in that leather chair, in that study filled with Thomas's memory, holding his most private thoughts against my heart. The afternoon light slanted through the windows and gradually faded to evening. Carol texted me twice, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I had just realized something terrible and wonderful at the same time. My children's absence at the funeral wasn't about me at all. It wasn't about some failure of mine. It was about them. They had become so consumed with their own lives, their own ambitions, their own busy schedules, that they couldn't see what was actually happening. They couldn't see that their father was dying, that their mother was grieving, that life was fragile and temporary and wouldn't wait for them to finally make time. And Thomas, my beautiful, heartbroken husband, had known this all along. He'd understood that his children had drifted away from him, and instead of fighting it or resenting them, he'd accepted it. And he'd tried, in the only way he knew how, to warn me. To tell me that I shouldn't depend on them for my happiness. That I should depend on myself. I opened the journal to that last entry again and read the words that would change everything about how I lived the rest of my life. Live, my love. Don't just survive. Live. And in that moment, sitting alone in my dead husband's study, holding his journal like it was the most precious thing in the world, I made a decision. I wouldn't spend the rest of my life grieving what I'd lost. My husband, my role as the family matriarch, my sense of purpose. Instead, I would honor Thomas's last wish. I would learn to live. Even if it meant learning to live without them. The first week after the funeral, I did what I'd always done in times of crisis. I cleaned. I scrubbed the kitchen cabinets until my hands bled. I reorganized the pantry. I washed every dish, every glass, every piece of silverware, even though most of them were already clean. I vacuumed the living room 3 times. Movement was a way to avoid thinking. Work was a way to avoid feeling. Carol came by on the Wednesday after the funeral and found me on my hands and knees, scrubbing the baseboards of the hallway. Maggie, she said quietly. Honey, you need to sit down. I need to clean, I told her. No, she said. You need to stop. She helped me to my feet. My knees were stiff and screaming, and she made me sit on the couch. She sat beside me and didn't say anything for a long time. Carol was good like that. She knew when to talk and when to just be present. After 43 years of friendship, she'd learned me. I found Thomas's journal. I told her finally. I watched her face carefully. Carol had been at the funeral. Carol had seen my children's absence too. I needed her to understand what I'd learned. I told her about the entries, about Thomas's quiet awareness that his children had grown into busy, distant versions of themselves, about his acceptance of it, and most importantly, about his last message to me. When I finished, Carol cried. Not because she was sad about Thomas. She'd already said goodbye to him in her own way, but because she understood what I was finally beginning to understand. He set you free, she said. What do you mean? He gave you permission, Maggie. Permission to stop sacrificing yourself for people who don't appreciate it. Permission to live your own life. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. That night I did something I hadn't done in 50 years. I made a list of things I wanted to do. Not things I needed to do. Not things I was supposed to do. Things I wanted to do. The list was short. Take a pottery class, join a book club, travel to the Coast d'Or, where Thomas and I honeymooned, learn to paint, sleep past 6 a.m. on weekends, spend time alone without feeling guilty, make new friends, fall in love with my life. I wrote it in Thomas's handwriting, trying to channel his voice, his encouragement. Then I posted it on my refrigerator, right next to a photo of him smiling in our garden. The pottery class started the following Monday. I was terrified. I hadn't done anything new in decades. I'd spent so long being what everyone else needed, wife, mother, volunteer, caregiver, that I'd forgotten how to be just Maggie. How to do something simply because it interested me, with no purpose beyond the doing of it. The studio was called Clay Hands, tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore on the downtown square. It was a small space filled with wheels and clay and the smell of earth and water. There were 6 other students in the beginner class, ranging from a woman who looked to be in her 60s to a young man who couldn't have been more than 30. The instructor, a woman named Lisa with clay under her fingernails and joy in her eyes, welcomed us with such warmth that I immediately felt less afraid. Welcome to Clay Hands, she said. This is a space where perfection doesn't matter. What matters is the process. What matters is feeling the clay in your hands and remembering that you can create something from nothing. She passed around a ball of clay and asked each of us to hold it, to feel it, to notice what it felt like. When it came to me, I was shocked by how soft it was, how responsive. It seemed to mold itself to my hands almost eagerly, as if it had been waiting for someone to pay attention to it. Your turns will come, Lisa said. But for today, just watch, just feel, just be here. I sat at one of the wheels and watched Lisa demonstrate the basics. She placed a ball of clay on the wheel, and as it spun, her hands guided it, shaped it, coaxed it into form. Her hands moved with such confidence and grace that I found myself mesmerized. It was like watching a dance or a prayer. When it was my turn to try, I was shaking. The wheel spun beneath my hands, and the clay felt wild and uncertain. I was trying too hard, Lisa said. I was thinking too much. Let go, she told me. Let the clay tell you what it wants to become. I tried. I really did. My first attempt was a disaster, a lopsided bowl that looked like it had survived a car accident. But as I was leaving, Lisa pulled me aside. You have good hands, she said, gentle hands. Hands that listen. In a few weeks, you'll be amazed at what they can do. I left the studio with clay under my fingernails and something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The book club met on Thursday evenings at the library where I'd volunteered for 30 years. I'd always known about the club, a group of women who met to discuss whatever book they were reading that month. But I'd never considered joining. I was always too busy, too needed at home, too responsible to spend an evening just talking about books. This month, they were reading The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, a story about found family and second chances. When I walked into the meeting room, there were 8 women sitting in a circle, ranging from someone who looked barely 40 to a woman who must have been 90 if she was a day. The 90-year-old woman smiled at me and pulled out a chair. I'm Eleanor, she said. Are you new? I'm Maggie, I said. My husband recently passed, and I thought maybe I should do something for myself. Eleanor's smile deepened. Smart woman. That's exactly what I did when Frank died. 30 years ago now. Best decision I ever made. We talked about the book for 2 hours. These women were brilliant and thoughtful and funny. They challenged each other's interpretations. They told stories. They laughed until they cried. And when they learned I had been a teacher's aide, they wanted to know everything. What I'd taught, what I'd loved about it, why I'd stopped. I became a mother, I said simply. And now? Eleanor asked. Now, I said slowly, I'm becoming myself again. The weeks that followed were a series of small miracles. I went to pottery class twice a week and eventually created a bowl that was actually beautiful, uneven and imperfect, but genuinely lovely. I brought it home and filled it with apples from the farmer's market. Every time I looked at it, I thought of Thomas's words, "Live, my love." I joined the book club and showed up every Thursday. Eleanor and I became fast friends. She told me stories about her life after Frank died, about the painting classes she took, the women she'd traveled with, the love she'd found in living for herself instead of for others. People think that's selfish, she said one evening. But it's not. It's the most generous thing you can do. When you learn to love your own life, you become someone worth loving. You become someone people want to be around. I started taking the small pottery pieces I made and giving them to Carol, to Eleanor, to the librarians who'd known me for 30 years. Each gift felt like a conversation, a way of saying, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm still becoming. And then, 1 month after the funeral, I did something I'd been afraid to do. I booked a trip to the coast. It was a week-long visit to the small beach town where Thomas and I had honeymooned in 1976. We'd stayed in a little bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple. We'd walked on the beach every morning. We'd talked about the life we were going to build together. We'd made love under the sound of the waves and felt like we could conquer anything. I'd thought I could never go back there without Thomas. I'd thought it would be too painful. But as I packed my suitcase, I realized something. Going back wasn't about revisiting the past. It was about honoring it. It was about standing in the same place where my love story had begun and acknowledging that what Thomas and I had created together was real and permanent and couldn't be diminished by death. The morning I left, I placed the journal on Thomas's desk and ran my fingers across his initials one more time. I'm living, my love, I whispered. I'm living for both of us now, and I meant it. It took them 6 weeks to realize I wasn't waiting around for them anymore. I got the first call on a Saturday morning in July. I was on the coast, walking along the beach where Thomas and I had honeymooned, my feet in the sand, my face turned up to the sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I looked at it, I saw David's name. For a moment, I debated not answering, but that felt petty and Thomas had raised me better than that. Hi, sweetheart, I said. Mum, his voice sounded panicked. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you all week. I'm at the coast, I said calmly. Remember, I mentioned I was taking a trip. There was a pause. I could almost hear him thinking, trying to remember a conversation that apparently hadn't registered with him. The coast. Alone? Yes, alone. For how long? Another 3 days? I said. I'm staying at a bed and breakfast. It's lovely, very peaceful. Another pause. I could hear the machinery of his mind working, calculating. David had always been like that, efficient, organized, trying to solve problems he didn't fully understand. Mom, we're concerned. You shouldn't be traveling alone so soon after Dad's death. What if something happens? What if you fall? I'm 72. David, not 92. I'm perfectly capable of walking on a beach. But don't you need us? Don't you want someone with you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with all the things that had gone unsaid between us for years. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said gently. I'll be home on Tuesday. We can have lunch then if you'd like. He made excuses about why he couldn't do lunch on Tuesday, and we hung up. But I could feel the shift. Something had changed. I'd done something unexpected. Something that didn't fit the role of grieving widow he'd assigned to me. The second call came on Wednesday. It was Sarah. Mom, I heard from David that you went to the coast alone. Without telling anyone, I told David. I said chopping vegetables for the dinner I was preparing for Eleanor and Carol, who were coming over for a meal I'd learned to cook from a cookbook I'd bought myself. But you didn't tell me. You didn't tell Jennifer. Should I have? I asked. Did you need me to tell you my whereabouts? It's not that. It's just, you seem different. You sound different. Are you okay? The concern in her voice was real. But it was the concern of someone checking on an appliance they'd forgotten they owned. It wasn't the concern of a daughter who'd missed her father's funeral. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm doing something I should have done a long time ago. I'm living my life, living your life. Mom, you just lost your husband. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, grieving? I am grieving, I said. But I'm also living. Your father wanted that for me. I told her about the pottery class, the book club, the trip to the coast. I told her I'd joined a painting class starting in the fall. I mentioned that Eleanor had invited me to travel with her and some friends to Italy next spring. There was a long silence on the other end. Italy? Sarah finally said. Mum, that's very soon after Dad's death. It's next spring, I said. That's 9 months away. How long am I supposed to wait before I'm allowed to have a life again? Sarah, she didn't have an answer for that. Jennifer didn't call. Instead, she sent a text asking if I was holding up okay, and mentioning that she'd been meaning to visit but work was absolutely insane, right now. The text felt like a checkbox on a to-do list. But then came the phone call that changed everything. It was David, but he wasn't alone. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, and then Jennifer's. They'd put me on speakerphone. A family meeting without a family. Mom, David began carefully, we're worried about you. You seem to be acting out of character. Acting out of character, I repeated. Yes, taking these trips, spending money on classes, going to Italy. These aren't things you do. You stay home. You take care of things. You're stable and dependable and boring. I finished for him. No, Sarah interjected. But you're grieving, and we think maybe you're making impulsive decisions that you might regret. I don't feel impulsive, I said. I feel more intentional than I have in years. Have you thought about seeing a therapist? Jennifer asked. Because honestly, Mom, this doesn't seem normal. That's when something inside me broke open. Not in a sad way, but in a way that felt like dawn. Like the moment when you finally see clearly something you've been looking at through fog. Let me tell you what's not normal, I said, and my voice was steady and clear. What's not normal is that you didn't come to your father's funeral. What's not normal is that you're so busy with your lives that you can't pick up the phone to check on your mother. What's not normal is that you're sitting there trying to convince me that I'm mentally unstable because I'm learning to live, when all you've taught me through your actions is that I don't matter enough to make time for. There was absolute silence. I'm not angry at you, I continued. I was angry, but I'm not anymore. I'm sad that you've grown into people who don't understand what matters. But that's your journey, not mine. Your father understood what really mattered. He spent his life with me, really with me, not just checking boxes. And before he died, he asked me to live. To actually live, not just exist to serve everyone else's needs. And that's what I'm doing. Mom, David started. I love you, I said, all three of you. But I love myself more now. And I'm not apologizing for that anymore. When you're ready to be in my life, really in it, not just when it's convenient, you let me know. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I sat down at my kitchen table and I cried. But they weren't entirely sad tears. Mixed in with the grief was something else, relief. Freedom. The feeling of finally putting down a burden I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Carol came over that evening and I told her everything. She listened to the whole story, and when I finished she took my hands. Do you regret it? She asked. No, I said, and I meant it. Then you did the right thing. The following week, David called, not on speakerphone, just him. I want to apologize, he said, for missing Dad's funeral, for not understanding what you're going through, for assuming you were having some kind of breakdown when really, you were just finally taking care of yourself. I let him talk, free, and then I listened as he told me about his own loneliness, how busy he'd been running from one thing to the next, never stopping long enough to feel anything. How hearing my words had made him realize that he barely knew his own mother anymore, that he wanted to change that but he didn't know how. Start by visiting, I said. Not to help me with anything, not to fix anything, just to be here, to have coffee with me in the morning, to sit with me, to really see me. I'd like that, he said quietly. Sarah called the next day. She was more guarded, less willing to admit fault, but she asked if she could come to my pottery class sometime. Just to watch, she said, just to understand. Jennifer took the longest. But eventually, she reached out too. She was younger, more stubborn, more caught up in the myth of her own importance. But even she, eventually, began to understand. It wasn't a magical transformation. My children didn't suddenly become the devoted kids I'd always hoped they'd be. Some relationships have drifted too far to cross back in a single leap, but they began to try, and more importantly, I began to accept them as they were, not as I'd hoped they would be. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about grief and healing. It's not just about mourning what you've lost. It's about finding yourself again in the process. It's about realizing that you can't control how other people show up for you, but you can always show up for yourself. Thomas had tried to tell me that in his journal, but I had to live it to believe it. Spring arrived in a rush of green and possibility. By the time Eleanor, myself, and 3 other women from the book club boarded the plane to Italy, I had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. The woman in the mirror was still me, still Maggie, but she was a Maggie I'd never met before. She was radiant. She was alive. She was free. The flight to Rome was Eleanor's idea. She'd been saying for years that she wanted to go back, to see it again with eyes that understood how precious it was. When she invited me, I said yes without hesitation. When the others heard, they wanted to come too. So there we were, 5 women ranging from 68 to 92 years old, none of us young, all of us certain that we still had living to do. We're going to be the most interesting people in Rome. Eleanor declared as we boarded, and she was right. We stayed in a small hotel in Trastevere, in the old part of the city where the streets were narrow and winding and smelled like history and fresh bread. We walked for hours. We sat in piazzas and drank espresso and talked about books and life and love. We went to museums and art galleries. We ate pasta that made us close our eyes in gratitude. And in Florence, something unexpected happened. We were in a small gallery, looking at paintings by local artists, when I locked eyes with someone across the room. He was a man, probably in his mid-70s, with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. He was looking at a landscape, a Tuscan hillside rendered in shades of gold and green. And there was such tenderness in his expression that I found myself unable to look away. He turned, felt my gaze, and smiled. Eleanor nudged me so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. His name was Marco. He was an artist, Italian, widowed for 5 years. He spoke English with a beautiful accent, and he had a laugh that sounded like music. We talked for 2 hours in that gallery, and he told me about his wife, about how after she died he'd thought his life was over. But then he'd picked up a paintbrush and it had saved him. Painting is like prayer, he said. You put your heart on the canvas, and somehow, the world makes sense again. I'm learning pottery, I told him. It's the same thing, I think. You put your hands in the clay and somehow, you find yourself. He asked if I would have dinner with him. Eleanor practically pushed me into accepting. That dinner changed something in me. Not because I fell in love with Marco, though he was lovely, and I did feel a spark of something I thought I'd never feel again. But because I realized, sitting across from him in that little trattoria, that I was capable of being desired, that I was interesting, that my life had value not because I served someone else, but simply because I existed. We spent the rest of the trip seeing each other when we could. He showed me his studio, where paintings of his late wife hung on the walls. Not in a sad way, but in a way that honored her. He took me to a sunset from the top of a hill overlooking Florence, and we didn't talk, just held hands and watched the sky turn colors I didn't know had names. On my last evening in Italy, he gave me a small painting. It was a woman sitting alone at a table, but she wasn't sad. She was looking out a window at something we couldn't see, but you could tell from her face that it was beautiful. On the back, he'd written, "For Maggie, for learning to live again, and for reminding me that it's never too late to love, life, other people, or yourself." I cried when I read it. Eleanor cried. Eleanor's friend Patricia cried. We all cried together in that little hotel room, and then we laughed, because we were 5 old women who'd gone to Italy and come back transformed. When I returned home, my house felt different. It was the same house, the same walls, the same furniture, the same memories, but I'd changed so much that the space had changed around me. It no longer felt like a tomb where I was waiting to die. It felt like a home where I was learning to live. Sarah came to visit a week after I got back. She brought her 3 children, and they helped me hang photos from the Italy trip around my living room. When she saw the painting Marco had given me, she looked at it for a long time. "Who is this from?" she asked. "A friend?" I said. "Someone I met in Florence?" "A friend?" She raised an eyebrow. "Yes," I said. "Someone who understands what it means to grieve, and then to choose to live anyway." Sarah looked at me carefully, and I could see her really looking at me for the first time in years. Not the version of me she expected to see, not the version of me she'd assigned in her mind, but the actual real woman standing in front of her. "You're happy," she said. It sounded like a question and an observation at the same time. "I am," I said. For the first time in I don't know how long, I'm actually happy. She hugged me then, and I felt her letting go of something. Maybe the guilt of the funeral, maybe the burden of trying to fix her grief-stricken mother who didn't need fixing. Maybe she was just finally ready to see who I really was. By summer, the pottery class had become the center of my social life. Lisa, the instructor, had asked if I wanted to help teach the beginner classes. I said yes immediately. Now, 2 afternoons a week, I showed new students how to center clay on the wheel, how to listen to what the clay wanted to become, how to create something beautiful from nothing but earth and water and intention. One of my students was a woman named Ruth, about my age, who'd recently retired after 40 years as a nurse. She'd spent her whole life taking care of other people, and now she was learning to take care of herself. We became fast friends. She started coming to book club with me. She went to pottery class 3 times a week. We started a painting class together, just the 2 of us, following online tutorials and learning from our mistakes. Eleanor introduced me to her painting teacher, a man named Vincent who held classes in his studio on Thursday evenings. He was younger than me by about 10 years, still healthy and energetic and full of opinions about color and technique. He had a wicked sense of humor and a way of making me laugh until my sides hurt. One evening, as we were cleaning up after class, he asked me to have dinner with him. "Not as a date," he said quickly. "Just as friends. I enjoy your company, and I'd like to spend more time with you." I said yes, and we went to a little Italian restaurant nearby. We talked for hours about art and life, and the things we'd learned from grief. He told me about his late wife, and I told him about Thomas. And by the end of the evening, we both understood something without needing to say it out loud, that sometimes people who've loved deeply can recognize each other, can see in each other the capacity to love again, even if it looks different the second time around. We didn't become lovers in the traditional sense. We became companions. We went to galleries together. We traveled to a small art colony upstate for a weekend and painted side by side. We cooked dinner together and sat in comfortable silence, reading in the same room. It was a kind of love I'd never experienced before, less about possession and control, more about genuine companionship and mutual respect. When David visited in August, he was shocked to find Vincent in my kitchen, making coffee while I set the table for breakfast. "Mom," he said carefully, "is this a friend?" I said, "Yes, a very good friend, and before you worry, I'm happy and I'm making good decisions, and this is exactly what your father would have wanted for me." David looked at Vincent, who smiled and extended his hand. "I'm Vincent. Your mother has excellent taste in coffee and art, and I'm honored to know her." They shook hands, and I watched David relax slightly. He was beginning to understand that his mother wasn't broken or acting out. His mother had simply become herself. By fall, a year had passed since Thomas's funeral. The grief hadn't disappeared. It was still there, a thread running through everything I did. But it was no longer the only thread. Woven around it were threads of joy and friendship and possibility and creativity and love. I'd taught my pottery class to 24 students. I'd completed 3 paintings that I actually liked well enough to hang on my walls. I'd traveled to 3 new places. I'd made friendships that felt deeper than any I'd had in decades. I'd learned that you could miss someone and be happy at the same time. That losing them didn't mean you had to lose yourself. One evening, Eleanor and I were sitting on my porch, drinking tea and watching the sunset when she took my hand. "Do you know what I love most about you?" she asked. "What?" I said. "You didn't let your story end when your husband died. You let it begin." I squeezed her hand, thinking of Thomas in his study, writing those words in his journal. Thinking of the message he'd left for me, the permission he'd given me to live. Thinking of all the women I'd met, Eleanor, Ruth, the book club members, the pottery students, who'd all taught me the same lesson in different ways. "He taught me," I said. "My husband. He taught me that love doesn't end in death. It transforms, and what it transforms into can be even more beautiful than what came before, if you're brave enough to let it." Eleanor nodded, understanding everything I wasn't saying out loud. That night, I took out Thomas's journal and added a page in my own handwriting, using his words as a guide. "My dearest Thomas, I'm writing this to thank you for loving me so well, for understanding what I needed before I understood it myself, for leaving me not with sorrow, but with a map. You told me to live, and I have. Not instead of grieving, but alongside it. I've learned that those 2 things, grief and joy, can exist in the same heart. I think you already knew that. I think that's what you were trying to tell me. I miss you every day. But I'm also so grateful for the love we had, for the life we built together, and for the life I'm building now. Alone but not lonely, independent but not isolated. You gave me that gift when you gave me permission to live. I will spend the rest of my days honoring that gift. I love you always, Maggie. I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf in Thomas's study, where it belonged. And then I went to bed. To the bed I now had all to myself, with fresh sheets and a soft pillow, and the knowledge that tomorrow I would wake up and live another day fully and completely. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 18 months after Thomas's funeral, I sat in a small conference room at the community center, facing a group of women I'd never met before. They'd come because of a flyer I'd created with Eleanor's help. It read, "Finding Yourself After Loss," a support circle for women learning to live again. There were 7 of them, ages ranging from 54 to 83. Each of them carrying a grief so heavy I could see it in the way they held their shoulders, the careful way they moved through the room like they were afraid of breaking. I recognized myself in every single one of them. "Thank you for being here," I began. "I want to start by telling you my story. Not to say that my experience is your experience, but to show you that what you're feeling right now, whatever it is, doesn't have to be the last chapter of your life." And so I told them. About Thomas's funeral, about the empty pews, about my children's absence, about sitting in that study with his journal, about the journey from grief into living. As I talked, I watched their faces. Some cried. Some nodded, recognizing their own pain in my words. One woman, a small woman named Patricia with white hair and kind eyes, reached over and squeezed the hand of the woman next to her. When I finished, there was silence. Then Patricia spoke. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said, "and I've been living in my daughter's guest room ever since. She says I'm not ready to be alone, but I think what she means is that she's not ready for me to be happy without her." "Have you told her that?" I asked. "No," Patricia said. "I didn't even know that's what I felt until you said it just now. This is what I've learned in the 1.5 years since Thomas died, that grief is not a solitary experience. That the pain of loss connects us in ways that nothing else can. That when you've been broken, you can recognize brokenness in others, and you can offer them the thing you needed most, someone who understands without judgment." Over the following months, the support circle grew. Women started bringing friends. Eleanor came and talked about her journey after Frank died. Ruth shared her struggle with identity after spending 40 years as a nurse defined by her job. A woman named Dorothy, who'd been widowed for 30 years, talked about the regrets she carried for not living fully in those decades after her husband's death. "Don't do what I did," Dorothy told the group. "Don't wait. Don't think you need permission. Don't believe anyone who tells you that grieving means you're not allowed to be happy. Your husband or wife wouldn't want that for you. Mine didn't. I just didn't listen in time. I started noticing patterns. The women who healed fastest weren't the ones who had the most supportive families. They were the ones who decided to do something for themselves. The ones who took a class or joined a group or learned a new skill. The ones who, in some small way, refused to disappear. I began offering pottery classes specifically for widows on Tuesday mornings. The waiting list grew so long that I had to start 2 sessions. Lisa, my pottery instructor, noticed what was happening and asked if I'd be willing to help her develop a formal program for grieving women at the studio. "I think you've found your calling," she told me. At first, I resisted. I was 74 years old. I wasn't trained in counseling or therapy. I didn't have credentials. But Eleanor sat me down one evening and said something I needed to hear. "Maggie, you don't need a degree to teach women how to live. You need a life, and you've got that now." So I did it. With Eleanor's support and Lisa's expertise, we created the Potter's Circle, a program combining pottery classes, support groups, and life coaching for women navigating loss. The focus wasn't on surviving grief. It was on building a life worth living after grief. Within a year, we had 40 women coming through the program. Some came for a few weeks and then felt ready to move on. Others stayed, became part of the community, built friendships that lasted beyond the program itself. A few discovered their own callings. Patricia, the small woman with the white hair, decided to go back to school to become a grief counselor. Another woman, Margaret, started a blog about life after loss that got thousands of followers. But the most rewarding part wasn't the success of the program. It was the individual moments. When a woman who'd been silent all week finally spoke up about her daughter's absence at her husband's funeral. When someone realized that her grief didn't mean she had to stop living. When a woman who came in hunched over and broken slowly began to straighten up, to smile, to talk about taking a trip, or joining a book club, or maybe, someday, falling in love again. One afternoon, a woman named Helen came to me after class with tears streaming down her face. "I don't know why I'm crying," she said. "I'm happy. Tell me about it," I said. "My son came to visit yesterday. He brought his family. And I told him I was thinking about going back to school. I want to study art history. And instead of trying to talk me out of it, he said, 'Mom, that's amazing. Tell me more.'" She collapsed into my arms and I held her while she cried. Not tears of grief, but tears of relief. Tears of finally being seen and supported for who she wanted to become. That's when I understood the real gift of what had happened. Yes, I'd lost my husband. Yes, I'd been abandoned by my children at my most vulnerable moment. Yes, I'd experienced depths of loneliness I didn't know existed. But out of that loss had come something precious, the ability to help other women. To sit with them in their pain and say, "I know. I've been there. And it doesn't have to destroy you. It can transform you." David visited in the spring, and I took him to one of the Potter's Circle sessions. He sat in the back and watched as I worked with the women, showing them techniques, listening to their stories, gently encouraging them toward their own lives. When it was over, he came up to me and hugged me. Not the stiff, obligatory hug from years past, but a real hug. A hug that said, "I see you now. I understand. I'm sorry for all the years I didn't. I'm proud of you," he said. "I never thought I'd see you like this. So alive, so purposeful. Your father showed me how," I said. "He couldn't be here to live his life, so I'm living for both of us. And now I'm helping other women do the same." Sarah came to a session too, and afterward, she asked if she could volunteer. She brought her daughter, who'd also experienced loss. And they worked together, learning to center clay on the wheel, learning to let their hands guide them toward creation instead of destruction. Jennifer was the last to really understand. But when she did it fully. She quit her marketing job and went back to school to study social work. She told me it was because of something I'd said in one of our conversations. That we all have wounds, and some of us are meant to help other people heal theirs. I wasted so much time, she told me when she visited to tell me about her decision. So much time chasing things that didn't matter. "I think I finally understand what you and Dad were trying to teach me." "It's not too late," I said. "It's never too late." By the second anniversary of Thomas's death, our support circle had expanded to include 2 more pottery instructors and a licensed therapist who volunteered her time. We'd helped over 100 women navigate the early stages of grief. Some of them had gone on to do remarkable things. Some of them had simply learned to live with more peace and less pain. Either way, I felt Thomas with me in every interaction, in every moment when a woman's face brightened with the realization that she could have a life after loss. I still missed him. I still kept his journal on the shelf in his study. I still wore my wedding ring. But the grief had transformed into something else. A deep gratitude for the time we'd had, mixed with joy for the time I had left. Vincent asked me to move in with him, not out of obligation or fear, but because we genuinely enjoyed being together. I said yes, but I kept my house too. I rented out the upstairs to Ruth, who needed to get out of her daughter's basement, where she'd been sleeping for 5 years. Now we had a whole floor to ourselves, and we spent our mornings making coffee together and planning our day. Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 94. We found out that she'd left money in her will specifically designated for the Potter's Circle, to keep helping women find their way home to themselves. At her funeral, 50 women showed up, women she'd touched through the program, women she'd befriended, women whose lives she'd changed just by showing them that it was never too late to live. I gave a speech at her memorial service. I talked about how Eleanor had been my guide, my friend, my mirror when I needed to see what was possible. I talked about how she'd proven, every single day of her long life, that age and loss and grief don't have to diminish you. They can expand you. They can make you bigger and deeper and more beautiful. Eleanor taught me that the best way to honor those we've lost, I said, is not to grieve alone in our rooms. It's to go out and live so fully, so joyfully, that the world is changed by our living. That's her legacy, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life carrying it forward. After the service, a young woman came up to me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. "Mrs. Hayes," she said. "I don't know if you remember me. I was in one of your early pottery classes. My husband died from cancer just like your husband did, and I was so lost. But you showed me that I didn't have to stay lost. You taught me that it was okay to live again. I wanted you to know that I'm getting remarried in the fall. And I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. And it's because of what you taught me. She hugged me, and I held her, and I thought about Thomas, about his journal, about those final words, "Live, my love. Don't just survive, live." I had done it. I had learned to live. And now every day, I got to help other women learn how to do the same. That was everything. That was the whole point. Today is the 5th anniversary of Thomas's funeral. I'm sitting in the same study where I found his journal, but the room looks different now. The walls are painted a soft sage green instead of the beige they were before. There are paintings hung throughout, some by me, some by Vincent, some by the women from the Potter's Circle. His desk is still there, but it's shared space now. I write at it too. Vincent uses it when he's paying bills. Ruth sometimes sits there to read. Life goes on. It changes the spaces we inhabit. I'm 76 years old now. My hair is completely silver, and I've stopped coloring it. My hands are weathered from years of clay and painting and living. My face has lines that tell stories, laughter lines around my eyes, worry lines from the years of grief. Determination lines around my mouth from the day I stood up to my children and told them that I mattered. I've been thinking a lot about that woman who sat in that empty church 5 years ago. The woman in the black dress, waiting for people who never came. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her something. I wish I could say, "This emptiness you're feeling right now, it's going to become fullness. Not the fullness of people around you, though that will come, but the fullness of finally understanding who you are when nobody needs you to be anyone else." I don't know if she would have believed me. I don't think I would have believed me either. But it's true. The phone rang this morning, and it was David. He's started calling me every week now, just to check in. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. He told me that his daughter, my granddaughter, is starting a pottery class at her school. She told her father that she wanted to learn because her grandmother had shown her that creating something beautiful can save your life. I cried when he told me that. Sarah has become one of the most dedicated volunteers at the Potter's Circle. She brings her 2 youngest children sometimes, and they help set up the studio, refill water bowls, arrange flowers. I watch my grandchildren learning that serving others is a privilege, and I think about how this right here, is the legacy that matters. Not the things we accumulate, but the values we pass down through our actions. Jennifer called last night from her graduate school dormitory. She's doing her thesis on elder isolation and how community programs like ours can improve mental health outcomes in aging populations. She's going to use the Potter's Circle as one of her case studies. She told me that what started with my pain is becoming the foundation of her life's work. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me what matters." I told her that I was just showing her what her father showed me. That love, real love, is about letting people become who they're meant to become. Even if it means stepping back and letting them walk their own path. But beyond my children, beyond my family, what really matters is the women. There are currently 43 women enrolled in the Potter's Circle. The waiting list is 60 deep. Lisa and I have trained 3 other pottery instructors. The licensed therapist, Dr. Chen, comes twice a month to lead support groups. We've started a satellite program in the next town over. Eleanor's Legacy Fund has funded scholarships for women who can't afford the classes. Yesterday, Patricia, that small woman with the white hair who was living in her daughter's guest room, graduated from grief counselor training. She's going to be working with us part-time, helping guide women through the early stages of loss. She came to find me after her graduation ceremony, and she took my hands. "I wouldn't be here," she said, "if you hadn't had the courage to share your story." "You would be here?" I told her. "You just needed permission to believe in yourself. Your daughter had to learn that you didn't need rescuing. You needed believing in." These conversations happen almost every day now. A woman will pull me aside and tell me about a decision she's made, to go back to school, to move into her own apartment, to take a trip, to say no to her children's expectations and yes to her own dreams. And every time, I think about that woman in the empty church and how far we've all come. Vincent and I are planning a trip to Portugal next spring. We're going with Ruth and her new partner, a kind woman named Sandra who works at the library. We're going to paint together, eat good food, sleep late, and spend our days exactly as we please. There's no guilt in it anymore. There's no voice telling me I should be home waiting for someone to need me. That voice died when Thomas died. And in its place came a quieter, kinder voice. A voice that sounds like Thomas, but also like me. A voice that says, you matter, your life matters, your happiness matters. I keep his journal still. I added another page recently. Not a letter this time, but reflections. I wrote, Thomas, 5 years have passed since you left this world. I've done what you asked. I've lived. I've lived so fully that sometimes I can barely believe it's the same person wearing this body. I've created beauty with my hands. I've made friends who feel like sisters. I've loved again. Differently but no less deeply. I've watched my children become people I'm proud to know. I've helped women find their way back to themselves after loss. And I've learned something that I wish you could know, but I think maybe you already did, that the best way to honor someone who's died is not to die with them. It's to become fully alive. It's to take the love they gave you and multiply it, share it, pass it on to others. You taught me how to live my love. And now I spend my days teaching others. That's your legacy. That's what you left behind. Not sadness, not emptiness, but the knowledge that life is precious, and it's never too late to claim it for yourself. I miss you, but I'm not waiting for you anymore. I'm not stuck in that church, sitting alone in that black dress. I'm out here, in the world, with paint under my fingernails and clay on my hands and light in my heart. I'm living the life we both deserved. And I'm making sure that other women get to live theirs too. Thank you for that gift. Thank you for loving me well enough to let me go. I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. It will stay there for as long as I live in this house. When I'm gone, I've asked my children to keep it. I want them to read those words someday and understand what their father was trying to teach them. That love isn't about holding tight. It's about letting go. That the people we care about aren't ours to keep. They're ours to support as they become who they need to be. Eleanor used to say something I think about often. The only thing we own is our time. Everything else is borrowed. I understand that now in a way I couldn't have understood it 5 years ago. Thomas borrowed my time for 48 years, and those were some of the best years of my life. But they weren't all my years. I was also borrowing time, giving it away without receiving anything in return except the assurance that I was being useful, being needed. And then Thomas died, and suddenly, I had time that belonged only to me. Time I could spend however I wanted. I spent it learning to live. People ask me sometimes, after the Potter's Circle sessions, if I think Thomas would be proud of what I've done. And I always say the same thing, I don't think he would be proud. I think he would say, of course you did this. This is who you've always been. You just needed to remember, because I think that's the real tragedy of women like me, women of my generation. We learned so well to disappear. We learned to make ourselves small. We learned that our worth came from serving others, and we became invisible to ourselves. We forgot who we were underneath all that service. The greatest gift Thomas gave me wasn't his love, though I cherish that. It was permission. Permission to stop disappearing. Permission to take up space. Permission to matter. On the 5th anniversary of his funeral, I did something I do every year now. I went to the church where we held his service. I walked to the front pew, the one where I sat alone, and I sat there again. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had Carol on one side and Ruth on the other. And I was smiling. I looked up at the pulpit where I'd stood 5 years ago, trembling, trying to eulogize a man my children couldn't be bothered to say goodbye to. And I thought about how much I've learned since that day. How much I've grown. How much my life has changed. And you know what? I'm grateful for the pain. I'm grateful for that empty church. I'm grateful for my children's absence that day, because it forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding my whole life, that I was enough, that my life had value independent of other people's needs. If they'd all been there, sitting in those pews, I might have continued the way I was, giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left of me. I might have lived out my days as a supporting character in everyone else's story, never the protagonist of my own. Instead, I became the woman I was always meant to be. I became Maggie. Before I close this story, I want to speak directly to you. If you're listening and you've experienced loss, if you've buried someone you loved, if you're sitting in your own version of that empty church, wondering if your life still has meaning, it does. It absolutely does. Your life doesn't end when someone you love dies, it transforms. And yes, that transformation is painful. Yes, it's terrifying. Yes? There will be days when you wonder if you can possibly survive without them. But you can, and more than that, you can thrive. Don't listen to the voices that tell you that grieving means you have to stop living. Don't accept the narratives people try to place on you. Don't disappear just because someone you love has disappeared. Live, please. Live for yourself. Live for the person who died, if that helps you. Live to honor the time you had together. Live to prove that your life has meaning independent of their presence in it. Take that pottery class. Join that book club. Travel to the place you've always dreamed of. Fall in love again, with a person, with a place, with a passion, with your own life. Make mistakes. Create beauty. Help other people. Become someone you're proud to be. And if your children don't show up to your funeral, if your family disappoints you, if the people you counted on let you down, don't let that be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning. Let it be the moment when you finally decide that you matter enough to fight for your own life. Because you do matter. You absolutely do. 5 years ago, I sat in an empty church wearing a black dress, and I thought my life was over. Today, I sit in a pottery studio surrounded by women who've become like sisters to me, and I know that my life was just beginning. That's what I want for you. That's what I want for every woman who's ever felt invisible, undervalued, or lost. I want you to become yourself, fully, completely, unapologetically. I want you to find the people who see you and cherish them. And I want you to spend the rest of your days creating a life so beautiful, so full, so rich with meaning that anyone looking at you would have to ask, how did you become so alive? And you can tell them what I tell everyone now. I had someone who loved me enough to let me go. I had an empty church that taught me I had to show up for myself. I had a journal that showed me what really mattered. And I had the courage to believe that my life didn't end when his did. It transformed, and that transformation saved me. It will save you too. Believe that. Please believe that. Because on the other side of this unbearable pain is a life more beautiful than you can currently imagine. I know. I've lived it. And I'm still living it, every single day. Thank you for letting me share my story. Thank you for reminding me, through your listening, that what I've learned matters. That my pain has meaning, because it's becoming the pathway for other people to find their own healing. If you're going through loss right now, I want you to know something. You're going to survive this. Not just survive, thrive. You're going to become someone you never thought you could be. You're going to live a life that honors both the love you had and the person you're becoming. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Now go live. Live fully. Live loudly. Live for yourself and for everyone who loves you. Live like your life depends on it, because it does.